Good evening, it's Monday, 12th of May, and here's what's making news around the world on World News Tonight. Ceasefire tension. India-Pakistan hold fire as Trump steps in with mediation offer. Papal plea. Pope Leo declares no more war in first emotional Sunday message. Dance therapy. Parkinson's patients rediscover joy and motion through movement program in Brooklyn.
From Colombo, this is World News Tonight with Yasiru Bitana.
Good evening once again. Despite sporadic cross-border fire and accusations of ceasefire violations, a fragile truce between India and Pakistan remains in effect, as President Trump offers to mediate the long-standing Kashmir dispute, a proposal cautiously welcomed by Islamabad.
Residents of Pakistani-administered Kashmir celebrated on Sunday as a fragile ceasefire between India and Pakistan appeared to hold, with US President Donald Trump offering to help resolve the arch-rivals' long-running dispute over the Himalayan region. Diplomacy and pressure from the United States helped secure the truce on Saturday, following the worst fighting between the nuclear-armed neighbours in nearly 3 decades. But hours after it took effect, explosions were heard and bright flashes lit up the sky in Indian-administered Kashmir, the centre of much of last week's conflict. The blasts died down by dawn, and shops on both sides of the contested border region were seen reopening on Sunday. Trump praised the leaders of both countries for agreeing to halt the aggression and said he would substantially increase trade with them. In a post on his Truth Social platform, the president added, quote, "I will work with you both to see if a solution can be arrived at concerning Kashmir. Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan each rule a part of Kashmir but claim it in full. They have twice gone to war over the region." Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif saying in a post on X he was extremely grateful to the US president, while its foreign ministry urged in a statement for the realization of what it called the Kashmiri people's inalienable right to self-determination. On the broader geopolitical implications at play, Markey said Washington does not want India in a conflict with Pakistan, as India is a strategic partner in helping the US counterbalance the weight of China across Asia.
In his first Sunday homily since his election, Pope Leo XIV delivered a plea for no more war, urging global leaders to cease hostilities in Ukraine and the Middle East to recommit to dialogue and reconciliation.
Cari fratelli e sorelle.
Pope Leo XIV appealed to the world's major powers for no more war in his first Sunday message since his election as pontiff.
L'immane tragedia della Seconda Guerra Mondiale.
The immense tragedy of the Second World War ended 80 years ago, on May 8, after leaving 60 million victims dead.
Nell'odierno scenario drammatico.
In today's dramatic scenario of a third world war being fought piecemeal, as Pope Francis repeatedly stated, I too appeal to the great ones of the world, repeating the ever-relevant plea, no more war.
Mai più la guerra.
Tens of thousands of people gathered in St. Peter's Square to listen to him speak. The new pope, elected on May the 8th, called for an authentic and lasting peace in Ukraine, along with the Gaza ceasefire and the release of all Israeli hostages held by militant group Hamas. He also welcomed the fragile India-Pakistan truce, calling for it to last. The rapt crowd were touched by his solemn message. Leo, the former Cardinal Robert Prevost, is the first US-born pontiff. He was a relative unknown to the world stage before his election. Previously, he served for decades as a missionary in Peru, before first becoming a cardinal to take up a senior Vatican role 2 years ago.
In Washington, US officials announced an agreement with China to reduce America's trade deficit, describing the outcome as constructive despite withholding specifics, and said further details will be clarified in subsequent negotiations.
I'm happy to report that we made substantial progress between the United States and China in the very important trade talks.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said on Sunday U.S. officials reached a deal with China to cut the trade deficit. He offered optimism and promised more details to come after 2 days of negotiations concluded in Geneva.
We will be giving details tomorrow, but I can tell you that the talks were productive.
Neither Besant nor U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer took questions from reporters. The meeting was the first face-to-face interaction between senior U.S. and Chinese economic officials since U.S. President Donald Trump took office.
We're talking about a tariff of 10% on China based on the fact that they're sending fentanyl to Mexico and Canada.
Trump launched a global tariff blitz that started with declaring a national emergency over the U.S. fentanyl crisis and imposing a new 20% tariff on Chinese goods in February. The president then followed with a 34% reciprocal duty on Chinese imports in April, and subsequent rounds pushed the rates into triple digits, bringing nearly $600 billion in two-way trade to a standstill. China had insisted that tariffs be lowered in any talks.
China says in order to have substantive negotiations, you have to bring down your 145% tariffs. Are you open to pulling back your tariffs in order to get China to the negotiating table?
No.
Trump said on Friday that an 80% tariff on Chinese goods, quote, seems right, suggesting for the first time a specific reduction target. Ambassador Greer said the talks had moved the two sides forward.
Just remember why we're here in the first place, since the United States has a massive $1.2 trillion trade deficit. So the president declared a national emergency and imposed tariffs. So we're confident that the deal we struck with our Chinese partners will help us to work toward resolving that national emergency.
A White House press release that simply repeated Besant's and Greer's brief comments with no details ran the headline, U.S. announces China trade deal in Geneva.
Iran and US negotiators will convene for their fourth round of nuclear talks in Oman amid recent rising concerns over Tehran's uranium enrichment program, with both sides expressing guarded optimism despite significant outstanding issues.
Tehran enters a fourth round of nuclear negotiations with the Trump administration saying its right to enrich uranium is non-negotiable. It rules out a zero enrichment demand made by some U.S. officials.
Now Steve is putting his talents to work.
U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff said just that on Friday. Speaking to Breitbart News, he said that an enrichment program can never exist in the state of Iran ever again. That's our red line, no enrichment. The Tehran Times headlines that Witkoff's comment dims the prospects for a nuclear agreement. The article cites a source saying Iran has been lured into talks so Washington could subsequently provide a justification for escalating pressure and potential aggression. The mood on the streets of Tehran was pessimistic ahead of the latest round of talks.
I would tell you for Iran.
The U.S. president withdrew Washington from a 2015 deal between Tehran and world powers meant to curb its nuclear activity. He has threatened to bomb Iran if no new deal is reached. Iran insists its nuclear ambitions are purely for civilian purposes.
And we want it to be a great country.
Talks in Oman take place ahead of Trump's visit to the region next week. AP is reporting that his trip to Saudi Arabia raises the prospect of nuclear cooperation with the kingdom.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has responded cautiously to Russian President Vladimir Putin's proposal for direct peace talks, emphasizing the necessity of binding security guarantees and international oversight to ensure substantive progress towards the end in the war.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky responded guardedly on Sunday to a proposal from Russian President Vladimir Putin of rapid, direct talks aimed at ending the war. Putin made his proposal in a televised statement from the Kremlin on Saturday, more than 3 years after he sent Russian forces to invade the smaller neighbor. U.S. President Donald Trump, who says he wants to be remembered as a peacemaker, called Putin's proposal, quote, a potentially great day for Russia and Ukraine. Trump broke from his predecessor, Joe Biden, in dropping a demand for an immediate Russian withdrawal from Ukraine, and instead pressed both sides to agree to a temporary ceasefire.
I want a ceasefire with guarantees, because you'll get a ceasefire faster than I'd agree.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
Zelensky and other Western allies resisted this, saying a pause in fighting would allow Russia to redeploy forces for further attacks. But they relented in the face of U.S. pressure and accepted the idea of a temporary truce. The Ukrainian leader said it was, quote, a positive sign that the Russians have finally begun to consider ending the war, but that, quote, the very first step in truly ending the war is a ceasefire. He said, quote, we expect Russia to confirm a ceasefire, full, lasting, and reliable, starting tomorrow, May 12th, and Ukraine is ready to meet.
It will focus on how to build and guarantee real and lasting security. Key points, 30-day ceasefire backed with sanctions.
On Saturday, Zelensky and other EU leaders announced their support for a 30-day ceasefire as a first step.
There is this ceasefire for 30 days proposal that is very clearly now on the table.
It's unconditional ceasefire for 30 days.
Putin, however, suggested that any ceasefire was a matter for negotiations. He said could take place in Istanbul later this week. The Kremlin chief said he did not rule out both sides agreeing in Turkey on, quote, some new truces, a new ceasefire, but one that would be the first step toward a, quote, sustainable peace. Putin said Russia had proposed several ceasefires, including a moratorium on striking energy facilities, an Easter truce, and most recently a 72-hour truce during celebrations marking 80 years since Soviet victory in World War II. None of those were agreed between the two sides, and each accused the other of continuing to attack in force during the supposed truce periods.
Let's take a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. Welcome back. President Trump will sign his executive order invoking the federal most favored nation principle to align U.S. prescription drug prices with the lowest rates paid internationally, aiming to lower costs for U.S. patients without additional legislative approval.
U.S. President Donald Trump said Sunday he would sign an order to cut prescription prices to the levels paid by other nations. He put that at 30 to 80% less than they are right now. In a post on Truth Social, the president said he would sign the order Monday morning. He said he would institute a so-called most favored nations policy, where the U.S. will pay the same price as the country with the lowest cost for any given drug. It wasn't immediately clear how the reductions would happen in practice, but drug costs are a hot-button issue in the U.S., which often pays close to triple the prices seen in other developed nations. In total, the country spends over $400 billion per year on medicines. Trump tried to tackle the issue in his first term with a proposed international reference pricing system, but saw the idea blocked by the courts. Drug industry insiders told they'd been expecting a new effort, probably with an order focused on the Medicare health insurance program. Some prices had already been renegotiated under previous President Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, but drug makers expect the new order to be more far-reaching. A spokesperson for an industry body criticized the move, saying government price setting in any form is bad for American patients.
New York Mayor Russ Baraka was released from custody after his arrest for trespassing during an after-the-fact inspection of a federal immigration detention center, an incident that has sparked debate over local authority versus federal enforcement.
At the gates of Delaney Hall Detention Center in Newark, an agitated crowd is pushing and shoving as federal officials block the entry to the mayor of the city, Russ Baraka, before he's arrested and detained for allegedly trespassing the facility.
The mayor of Newark, Russ Baraka, committed trespass and ignored multiple warnings from Homeland Security investigations to remove himself from the ICE detention center in Newark, New Jersey. This afternoon, he has willingly chosen to disregard the law.
Mayor Baraka, who is running to be the next New Jersey governor, has been protesting against the opening of the 1,000-bed detention center over unresolved building permit issues. 3 U.S. congressmen who accompanied him on Friday condemned the ICE agents' behavior and said they were conducting an oversight of the facility, something which they are entitled to do as elected officials. Mayor Baraka's arrest drew a crowd outside of where he was being detained, with protesters and worker unions demanding his release before he was eventually freed. Delaney Hall is just one of the many immigration detention centers which has reopened in the U.S. following the Trump administration's crackdown on undocumented immigrants and plans to increase detention beds nationwide.
Mexico's government filed a lawsuit against Google, accusing the tech giant of misrepresenting maps by recently renaming the Gulf of Mexico as Gulf of America, a change allegedly implemented following pressure from US officials.
She threatened legal action against Google back in February over its labeling of the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America on Google Maps for US users. President Claudia Sheinbaum has now announced that Mexico is following through on that warning.
Google is already being sued. There has already been a first resolution, and it is being awaited.
Sheinbaum insists that Donald Trump's executive order in January to rename the Gulf applies only to the US section of the continental shelf.
What we are saying is that Google should put the Gulf of America where it is the Gulf of America, which is the part that corresponds to the territory of the United States, and then put the Gulf of Mexico to the territorial part that corresponds to Mexico and Cuba.
Google has previously argued that it made the change in line with a practice of following name changes when altered by official government sources. Sheinbaum's announcement comes after the Republican-led House of Representatives voted earlier this week to formalise the name change for federal agencies.
On this vote, the yeas are 211, the nays are 206. The bill is passed without objection.
The measure is unlikely to be given the green light by the Senate. Trump has contended that his order was justified as the US, quote, do most of the work there and it's ours. Critics argue the move is in line with his expansionist aims, which include threatening to seize control of Greenland. The water has been referred to as the Gulf of Mexico for more than 4 centuries and is internationally recognized as such.
The United States and Hamas have agreed to release a dual US-Israeli hostage, Eden Alexander, in Gaza, exchange for easing conditions in the territory and related goodwill measures, marking a significant development in ceasefire negotiations.
The last American hostage in Hamas custody about to be released. 21-year-old Eden Alexander, raised in New Jersey and who'd volunteered to join the Israeli military, held captive for 583 days, possibly hours away from being reunited with loved ones. His family tonight saying they're in ongoing contact with the U.S. administration. President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, expected to travel to Israel tomorrow, but Alexander is set to be freed. Hamas issuing a statement. The release of Israeli soldier Eden Alexander will be part of the steps being taken to achieve a ceasefire and allow aid to reach our people. Eden Alexander was last seen in a Hamas video in April and one in November addressing President Trump directly, one of several proof-of-life videos released since October 7th.
Dear President Trump, my name is Eden Alexander.
Tonight's announcement did not mention the Israeli government's involvement, the U.S. negotiating with Hamas through mediators, seemingly bypassing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The families of other captives now waiting for news their loved ones could be released too, while many people in the region will be hoping this deal could lead to a lasting truce.
Sudan's civil defense authorities reported that the fires at country's primary fuel depot in Port Sudan, ignited by drone strikes, have now been fully contained, protecting the infrastructure and reassuring residents about fuel supply security.
For more than 2 years, it was a relative haven of safety during Sudan's civil war. Port Sudan was a place of escape. Even the government moved here after it lost control of the capital, Khartoum. But now the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces are carrying out an intense bombardment of the city. It suffered a week of sustained drone strikes targeting energy infrastructure, military sites and the airport. Amnesty International says it has evidence the RSF is using Chinese-made drones supplied by the United Arab Emirates. The UAE denies this, but the Sudanese government has declared it a hostile state and cut diplomatic ties.
When the UAE became certain of the defeat of its local proxy by our legitimate armed forces, it escalated its support and devoted more resources to the rebellion with advanced strategic weapons.
The daily drone strikes are a change in tactics for the RSF, which up to now has used mainly ground offensives. It switched its focus after the Sudanese armed forces made significant advances, including regaining most of the capital in March. Military analysts say compelling the armed forces to defend Port Sudan may prevent them from protecting other parts of the country they hold, in orange on this map, or moving into the western part of the country controlled by the Rapid Support Forces, in green. Another potential consequence, the attacks could hamper the entry of aid and medical supplies through Sudan's main seaport, threatening to make what's already one of the world's biggest humanitarian disasters even worse across the country.
Let's take a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. Welcome back. As the Cannes Film Festival 2025 approaches, enormous posters adorned with heart motifs have been installed throughout the city, generating excitement among the filmmakers to celebrate love, cinema, and the power of storytelling on Riviera screens.
Finally, in France, the 78th Cannes Film Festival kicks off Tuesday until May 24th. This year's festival will open with the French comedy Leave One Day by Amélie Bonin, marking the first time a debut director's film has been selected for the opening slot. 22 films have been officially selected for competition. Notably, actors Scarlett Johansson and Kristen Stewart will debut as directors with their respective films Eleanor the Great and Chronology of Water. Despite global challenges, including potential U.S. tariffs on international films, the festival's president expressed confidence in Cannes' commitment to showcasing diverse and significant films.
A dance program in Brooklyn is transforming lives with individuals with Parkinson's disease by harnessing music and choreography to improve mobility, boost mood, and foster community, demonstrating the therapeutic power of movement for chronic neurological conditions.
The magic of movement, captured here at the Mark Morris Dance Group in Brooklyn, New York. This class welcomes dancers living with Parkinson's disease, or PD. The Dance for PD program got its start more than 20 years ago, according to program director David Leventhal, who says it has an important goal in mind. Symptoms of PD can include tremors, stiffness, loss of mobility, as well as cognitive changes and mood disorders. While there is no known cure, there are several therapy options, including dance. Judy Dean had been a volunteer at Dance for PD for 5 years before her son Tom was diagnosed with the disease. As many as 1 million people are living with Parkinson's disease in the U.S. Research shows that dance can help Parkinson's patients with balance, strength, and coordination. And a recent small study suggests that dancing can help improve patients' moods and ease depression as well. Dance for PD offers classes all around the world and even online. As for this class, the curtain closed with a dance number fit for the silver screen.
Well, that's a wrap from all of us here at World News Tonight. I'm Yasser Vitana, and we leave you now with powerful visuals from Cairo that captures Gaza war through the lens of photojournalists. Thank you for watching. Have a great night.